The ring arrived on a Tuesday morning in late October, when the maple trees outside my kitchen window had turned the shade of aged bronze. I was on my second cup of coffee, still in my bath gown, watching the leaves drop into the backyard I hadn't swept in 3 weeks. Retirement had given me more hours than I knew what to do with, and I'd spent most of them avoiding the things that needed doing. My phone pulsed on the counter. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. At 64, you start answering every call you don't recognize. You never know. Mr. Harlow. This is Margaret Finch. I'm a notary with Finch and Associates on King Street. I'm calling about your late wife, Eleanor. I set my coffee down. I know this may seem unusual, she said, her voice careful and measured, the way people speak when they're carrying something heavy. But Eleanor came to my office 14 months before she passed. She left something in our secure storage with very specific instructions. I was to contact you exactly 2 years after her death. That date was last Friday. I didn't say anything. Eleanor had been gone for 2 years. 2 years of learning to cook for one, of sleeping on my side of the bed, out of habit, 2 of still buying 2 toothbrushes at Shoppers Drug Mart without thinking. She asked that you come alone, Margaret Finch said, and she was very specific about that. She wrote it in her instructions. Alone, and without telling your sons. I stood in my kitchen for a long moment after we hung up. Through the window, a single red leaf let go of its branch and dropped straight down. No wind to carry it sideways, just down. I drove to King Street that afternoon without telling anyone. Margaret Finch was a woman in her mid-50s with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Her office smelled like old paper and Earl Grey tea. She shook my hand firmly, the way people do when they respect what they're about to say to you. And she sat me down across from a mahogany desk that had probably heard 1,000 difficult conversations. Before I give you this, she said, placing a sealed envelope on the desk between us, I want you to know that Eleanor was very composed when she came to see me. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't angry. She paused. She was clear. She knew exactly what she was doing and why. The envelope had my name on it in Eleanor's handwriting. That looping, unhurried cursive she'd had since she was a girl in Charlottetown. Just seeing it made my chest tighten in a way I wasn't prepared for. Take all the time you need, Margaret said, and she stepped out. I sat there for a moment just holding it. The paper was cream-colored, the seal unbroken. Eleanor had touched this, had sat somewhere with a pen and thought carefully about every word she was about to write to me, knowing she wouldn't be there when I read it. I opened it. My darling Walter, if you're reading this, then 2 years have passed, and I hope with everything I have that you've been okay. I hope you've been eating properly and getting outside, and that you haven't been giving Mrs. Boat Kowalski's shepherd's pie more credit than it deserves just because she brings it over every Sunday. I almost laughed. Almost. I need tell you some things I couldn't say while I was alive. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want our last months together to be about this. I wanted them to be about us. I hope you can understand that, Walter. I love our sons. I want you to know that first before anything else. But love and trust are not the same thing. And I have watched for longer than you know, as both Marcus and Derek have slowly, quietly, been treating us as a problem to be managed rather than parents to be cherished. I stopped reading, looked up at the ceiling, then I looked back down and kept going. I'm not saying this out of bitterness. I kept notes. Me love. You know how I am. Dates, amounts, conversations. I kept them in the blue binder in my craft room, behind the fabric samples on the bottom shelf. I want you to look at it not to make you angry but so you can see clearly what I saw and make your own decisions with your eyes open. I trust you, Walter. I always have. That's why I'm telling you this now, instead of never. All my love, across whatever comes next, Eleanor. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I sat in Margaret Finch's office on King Street for another 20 minutes before I trusted my legs enough to stand. The drive home took 40 minutes because I didn't go directly home. I drove down Lakeshore, past the waterfront, past the marina where Eleanor and I to walk on Sunday mornings before her knees got bad. I drove until the lake opened up wide on my left and the November sky sat low and gray over the water. And I let myself feel the full weight of what I was holding. When I finally got home, both my son's cars were in the driveway. This was not unusual. Marcus, my older son at 41, had moved back into the house 18 months ago after his second business venture collapsed. He'd taken the finished basement and the second parking spot and most of the shelf space in the garage. Derek, 38, had never fully moved out. He'd gone to Waterloo for 2 years, come back, and simply stayed. His room was still his room. His laundry was still done in my laundry room. I had told myself this was fine. I had told myself this was what family did for each other. I went in through the side door and heard them in the kitchen. Marcus was on his phone laughing at something while Derek stood at the counter eating crackers directly from the box. "Hey, Dad," Derek said without looking up. "Did you pick up milk?" "No," I said. "I didn't know we needed milk. I texted you." "I didn't see it." He shrugged and ate another cracker. Marcus glanced up from his phone, gave me a quick nod, and went back to his conversation. Neither of them asked where I'd been. I went to Eleanor's craft room. I hadn't changed it 2 years and I hadn't moved a thing in there. Her sewing machine was still on the table by the window. Her fabric samples were still sorted by color in the wicker baskets she'd found at a church sale in Oakville. The room still smelled faintly like her lavender and the particular brand of hand cream she'd used for 30 years. I found the blue binder exactly where she'd said it would be, behind the fabric samples, bottom shelf. I took it to our bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and started reading. Eleanor had been keeping notes since the year Marcus turned 35. Mate, dated entries in her precise handwriting. I read for 2 hours without stopping. The picture that emerged was not dramatic. There was no single moment of betrayal, no explosion. It was quieter and worse than that. There were entries about the $23,000 Marcus had borrowed in the spring of 2019, supposedly, to bridge a gap in his business financing. He'd mentioned repaying it several times. He never had. Eleanor had noted each conversation where the subject came up and was deflected. There were 7 of them. There were entries about Derek's car, the Audi he was driving, which I'd believed he was leasing himself, since he'd told me he'd gotten a good deal through a friend at the dealership. Eleanor had found the pre-authorized debit on our joint account 14 months before she died. $68 a month. For 3 years, there were entries about a conversation she'd overheard between the two of them in the garage. She'd written it down word for word. Marcus had said, and I read this sentence 3 times, "By the time anything actually happens, the house will be worth at least 1 sir." Snorts. If we're living here, that's rent-free equity for however long it takes. Just don't antagonize him. I closed the binder. I put it on Eleanor's pillow. I sat there in the room that still smelled like her hand cream. And I thought about 38 years of marriage. And the woman who had watched all of this with clear, sad eyes. And had loved me enough to tell me the truth from beyond, wherever she was now. I did not sleep well that night. The next morning I called my own accountant, a woman named Deborah Ozay, who had handled my finances since before I retired from the civil service. I told her I needed a full accounting of all transfers, pre-authorized payments, and loans out of my accounts over the past 6 years. I told her it was urgent. She had a preliminary summary to me by end of day Thursday. The numbers were worse than the binder. Between direct loans, secondary charges, on accounts I hadn't monitored closely enough, and what Deborah identified as an unauthorized addition of Derek's name to one of my older savings accounts, an account that had $34.0 it that I'd put aside years ago for a trip Eleanor and I had always planned to take to the Scottish Highlands. The total was over $87. Ling-ling-ling. $87,000. I was a retired federal employee from the Treasury Board. I had a pension. I had savings. I had the house. I was not destitute, but I was 64 years old. My wife was gone. and my two sons had quietly helped themselves to $87,000 of the life Eleanor and I had built together, while living in my house, eating my food, and using my utilities, and neither of them had ever once looked me in the eye and told me the truth about any of it. I called my oldest friend, a man named Gordon, who I'd known since we were both posted to Ottawa in 1987. Gordon was the kind of person who didn't tell you what you wanted to hear. He told you what you needed to hear. And then he made you a drink. I drove to his place in Burlington on Saturday morning, and I sat in his kitchen and told him everything. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want to do, Walter?" I told him I didn't want to blow up my family. I told him I didn't want to be the kind of father who counted every dollar. I told him Eleanor had loved those boys, even as she was warning me about them. Gordon looked at me. "You're not asking me what you want to do." He said, "You already know what you're going to do. You're asking me if you're allowed to." He was right. He usually was. I went to see a lawyer the following Monday. Not the family lawyer Marcus had once recommended to me, and whose name I now thought about with some suspicion. I found a new one, a man named Arthur Bekele at a firm in Hamilton, who came recommended by Deborah. I brought the binder, the financial summary, and Eleanor's letter. I sat in his office and laid it all out. Arthur Bekele listened without interrupting. When I finished, he folded his hands on his desk and said, "You have options, Mr. Harlow. The real onus, let me walk you through them." I didn't pursue criminal action. That wasn't what I was after. What I wanted was clarity and protection. Arthur helped me put that in place. We began with a codicil to my will, removing both Marcus and Derek as primary beneficiaries and establishing a trust structure instead, one with conditions and an independent trustee who was not a family member. We reviewed the savings account where Derek had added his name, which Arthur confirmed was done without proper authorization. And we corrected that. We documented the loans, formally creating legal instruments that acknowledged the amounts owed and established repayment terms. Then I told Arthur I wanted to sell the house. He didn't blink. "That's your right," he said. The house on Millcroft Drive was a 4-bedroom colonial that Eleanor and I had bought in 1991 for $214. Ling, ling, ling. In the current market, it was worth close to $1. $2 million. I had never thought of it as anything other than a home. But I'd read Marcus's words in that binder enough times that I couldn't be in it anymore without hearing them. I told the boys on a Wednesday evening. I asked them both to sit down at the kitchen table, the same table where Eleanor had served 30 years of breakfasts and Christmases and ordinary Tuesday suppers. And I told them I'd spoken to a lawyer, that I had reviewed my finances thoroughly, and that I would be selling the house in the new year. Marcus went still in the way he did when he was recalibrating. Derek said, "What? Why?" "Because it's my house," I said. "And I've decided it's time." Marcus recovered first. He leaned back in his chair and used the reasonable voice, the one I recognize now. "Dad, that's a big decision. Have you thought about the tax implications? About where you'd even go? We can help you think through this. We don't want you making a rushed." "I'm not rushing," I said. "I've been thinking about this for several weeks." "You didn't say anything to us." "No," I said. "I didn't." Derek looked between his brother and me. He was the one, I think, who felt at first that something had shifted in the room. In me. In the whole arrangement of things. He said, "Dad, is everything okay?" I looked at my younger son. I thought about the $34. Ling, ling, ling. I thought about Eleanor at her craft table, writing the date at the top of a new page in her blue binder, keeping careful, the faithful notes about things she hoped she'd never have to use. "I'm going to be fine," I said. "But I think it's time for both of you to make your own arrangements. I'll give you 60 days, which is more than fair." The following weeks were difficult in the way that honest things are often difficult. There were phone calls. There was a conversation with Marcus that became an argument in which he said things that were designed to make me feel guilty and afraid, and in which I discovered with some surprise that they no longer worked on me. There was a long silence from Derek that finally broke with a text message asking if we could talk. And we did. Over coffee at a Tim Hortons near his new apartment. And it was strained and incomplete, but it was real. In a way, our conversations hadn't been for years. I was not trying to punish them. I want to be clear about that. Eleanor had not asked me to punish them. She had asked me to see clearly and to choose consciously. And that was what I was doing. The house sold in February for $1. Lombra Babasu. Ling ling ling. I took a modest apartment in a building near the waterfront in Burlington. Close to the lake. Close to Gordon. Close to the walking trails. Eleanor and I had always said we'd use more. I furnished it simply. I kept her reading chair. I kept the blue binder. Though I haven't opened it again. With a portion of the proceeds after taxes and the fees and the business of resettling a life, I established a small annual bursary through the local community foundation. It goes to mature students, people over 50 returning to education after career changes or life disruptions. Eleanor had gone back to finish her bachelor's degree at 53, taking night classes at McMaster while working part-time at the library. And she had been prouder of that degree than almost anything. I named the bursary after her. The foundation sent me a letter confirming the first recipient, a 61-year-old woman from Stony Creek who was completing a social work degree. I put the letter in the drawer where I keep important things. I talked to Derek occasionally. He's been honest with me once or twice in ways he wasn't before. And I find I can accept that without needing it to fix everything. Marcus and I are in a more difficult place. I don't know yet what that becomes. What I know is this. Eleanor sat alone in a notary's office on King Street and wrote me a letter she wasn't sure I'd ever have the courage to act on. She knew my tendency to look away from hard things. She knew I loved my sons in a way that had sometimes made me blind. And she loved me anyway. Trusted me anyway. Told me the truth anyway. And then lifted in my hands on the first warm evening in April. I walked down to the lake at dusk. The water was still gray, but there was something different in the light. I stood there for a while with my hands in my jacket pockets watching the last of the sun go sideways across the surface of Lake Ontario. And I thought about Eleanor on the shore in Prince Edward Island when she was young before I knew her, standing in a different light and already becoming the woman who would one day love me well enough to tell me what I didn't want to hear. I said, "Thank you," out loud to no one and to her. Then I turned around and walked home.